My next guest is not going to know what that means, but all of you Cecil tards out there, you set aside your stuffed animal now that I'm sure they're selling of Cecil the lion, okay? And I want you to start putting your humanity hats on and to start thinking about some human beings that as of this date, Extortion 17, this is the anniversary of the downing of Extortion 17. You're going to hear more about it. If you don't know about this, you're about to hear from my next guest. His name is Don Brown. He spent 5 years on active duty in the U.S. Navy as an officer in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, which is JAG for short. A graduate of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the Campbell University School of Law, Don continued his studies in the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, earning the Navy's non-resident certificate in international law. While serving as a U.S. Navy JAG officer, Mr. Brown was a military prosecutor and was appointed Special Assistant United States Attorney for the Southern District of California. He was published in the U.S. Navy Law Review in 1992, drafting a legal position paper instructing JAG officers on defending against temporary injunctions filed against the military. His final duty station was at the Pentagon, where he served on staff of the Navy Judge Advocate General, providing legal advice to the Secretary of the Navy on a variety of officer personnel issues. He is the author of 10 published novels, primarily military action thrillers published through HarperCollins Publishing Company. 2 of his novels have reached #1 on the Amazon bestsellers list for fiction, including the national bestseller Treason, which is said by some to have predicted the Fort Hood terror attacks in 2009. His 11th book is a nonfiction military expose entitled Call Sign Extortion 17, the shoot-down of SEAL Team 6, published by Rowman and Littlefield in 2015, which provides a historical chronology and critical examination of the shoot-down of a U.S. Army Chinook helicopter in Afghanistan in the early morning hours of August 6th. 2011, which cost the lives of 30 U.S. servicemen. Very important servicemen. As I said, some of our best trained, brightest, physically and mentally fit of all of our troops that we have. They're recognized that way. These were SEAL Team 6 members. Since leaving active duty in 1992, he has lived and practiced law in Charlotte, and I welcome him to the show for the first time on this memorial occasion, remembering those souls that were lost, but shall never be forgotten here on the Pete Santilli Show. Welcome to the show, Don Brown, sir.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you for having me, and thank you for remembering these brave Americans on this day when so many have forgotten. And even as tonight, the presidential debates proceed, and no one still pays attention to the true heroes that have shed their blood for this country under questionable circumstances. So I appreciate what you're doing to continue to keep the story alive.
Yeah, yes, sir. We have, we have dug into, some of us would call us, especially those in the mainstream media that have attacked us by exposing so many different issues. This topic in particular, such as the cover-up that ensued after Extortion 17 was downed. We heard from family members. We started out exposing these issues. Some people would call us conspiracy theorists, but a lot of these facts have surfaced and have come to us directly from the family members. Sir, can we begin, if you don't mind, by sharing with our listening audience, and then maybe we'll back up a little bit, but can we begin by telling each and every listener right now what they must know about some of the facts surrounding Extortion 17 being down, that everyone must know that they may not have heard anywhere?
Right. Let's start with explaining what Extortion 17 was. Extortion 17 was the call sign for a United States military helicopter, a Chinook CH-47D. If your listeners are not familiar, that is a troop transport chopper that also carries equipment. It is basically defenseless. On August the 6th of 2011, 4 years ago tonight, at approximately 2:22 a.m. local time, a group of United States Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6 was suddenly and quickly rushed onto this chopper under questionable circumstances, along with 3 United States Air Force Special Operations types, 5 other United States Navy support personnel for the SEALs, and 5 members of United States National Guard air crew. The chopper took off on a mission that should have lasted 10 minutes from wheels up to wheels down. Remember, it's an old Chinook helicopter. It is Vietnam era and is basically defensive in nature. Taking off along with it is another helicopter just like it, another Chinook, call sign Extortion 16. The first strange occurrence is that second helicopter is absolutely empty, while Extortion 17 is jam-packed with SEALs. Now, to put this in perspective, August the 6th, 2011, is approximately 96 days after U.S. Navy SEALs have taken out Osama bin Laden. And there have been threats of retaliation almost immediately, and I'll go into that a little bit later.
Yes, sir.
These choppers take off, and again, this is a mission that should be 10 minutes from wheels up to wheels down. They head in from Logar province, which is on the Pakistani border in the northeastern sector of Afghanistan, over into Logar province, and as the choppers take off, they are joined by 3 other United States military aircraft. So there are now 5 aircraft in the sky moving toward, or already positioned over this prospective landing zone where this helicopter is headed. There are 2 Army Apache helicopters that are offensive in nature with tremendous firepower. Remember, I just said that the Chinook, on which these SEALs are jammed, has no firepower except for a small caliber machine gun, which is not offensive in nature. But the Apaches flying with it have tremendous firepower. In addition to that, there is an AC-130 gunship, a fixed-wing aircraft with 4 rotors on it, with 4 propellers, which is circling overhead, waiting for the SEALs to approach the landing zone, watching that landing zone. Now, as the chopper takes off for a 10-minute flight, about 6 or so minutes into the flight, after 6 minutes, something goes wrong. We start losing contact with the chopper. The chopper flies a pattern, if you can think of a fishing hook, that resembles a fishing hook from the air. And as it begins to turn along the curve of that fishing hook and turn back in toward the spear, we start losing contact with it. It appears to stall in the air. In the meantime, that AC-130 aircraft sees Taliban moving toward the landing zone. It requests permission to take Taliban out repeatedly and is denied permission to take Taliban out. As the chopper, now almost 9 minutes overdue from landing, begins to move closer to the landing zone at about 100 to 150 feet off the ground, that Taliban, which the AC-130 asked to take out, someone gets off a shot with an RPG, hits the back blade of the chopper, of the American chopper, and it falls 100 to 150 feet, hits the ground, catches on fire, and kills all 30 Americans. And also 8 Afghans who are on board. And Pete, this is the largest loss of life, of American life in the Afghan war. It is the largest loss of life in the history of the United States Navy SEALs, and we are just scratching the surface with the synopsis that I just gave you.
Yes, sir. Now, this is the first time. I mean, there's a lot of details. I've tried to stay as close as I could to help promote awareness of the cover-up through the families. This is the first that I heard. Now, sir, if we could factualize this, your credentials that I gave at the introduction are really important to establish this. I mean, you are not just some conspiracy theorist that's doing this as a hobby. When you mentioned that the AC-130 aircraft spotted the Taliban moving towards the helicopter's landing zone, requested permission to fire, and was denied permission, this is documented, correct?
It is documented. It is documented in the United States military's investigation. Now, let me explain how this happened. The chopper went down 4 years ago today, August 6th. The next day, immediately, 4-star Marine Corps General James Mattis, who was CENTCOM, commander of the United States Central Command out of MacDill Air Base, orders an investigation. He sends a 1-star Army brigadier general to Afghanistan named Jeffrey Colt, and gives him 25 to 30 officers to help him investigate. They commence an investigation, and Pete, that investigation lasts 5 weeks, from August the 7th, 2011, the day after the shoot-down, until September 13th, 2011. September 13th, 2011, the military, through Brigadier General Colt, signed off on by General Mattis, the 1-star and the 4-star, concludes there's no fault, that the shoot-down is basically something that happens in the fog of war, and creates what I consider to be really sort of a phantom issue about whether the Army National Guard chopper should have been used. We'll get to that in a second. But the investigation is closed 5 weeks after the shoot-down, saying no fault. Okay. A month after that, October of 2011, with the investigation being closed September the 13th, the military invites family members, and I know you had some of them on your show, and I appreciate that,
yes,
to Little Creek, Virginia, which is the home of SEAL Team 6, for a briefing. During this briefing, Brigadier General Colt is answering questions from the family members about what happened to their sons. But here's where it begins to get interesting. Also during that briefing, and remember, I just told you there was a 5-week investigation.
Yeah.
During that 5-week investigation, over 1,200 pages of evidence was gathered. That investigation was classified as top secret. But somehow, some way, someone declassified most of that and put it on a stick drive and handed it to a number of family members. Now, that's a mystery as to how that happened. Typically, it takes years and years and years and years to declassify something that's been top secret.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes as many as 50 years. But somebody wanted this out, Pete, and they handed these discs to the family members.
Wow.
When the military found out the family members had discs with over 1,250 pages of testimony, of photographs, of maps, of just about anything you could wanted to see, they initially asked for those discs back. But then they changed their mind. I suppose they thought it would look bad, and the cat was out of the bag. It would make them look guilty. So the family members had these discs, and I know you've had a couple of the gentlemen on, families with you, but
yes,
frankly, these discs are hard to look at because when you're looking at details of evidence about how your son died, it's hard to do. But some began to look, and some began to have questions, okay? And after a while, some began to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Billy Vaughn, who was the father of fallen Navy SEAL Aaron Vaughn.
Yes,
Billy
sir.
and his wife Karen are great Americans.
Yes, sir.
And Billy, at the urging of Charles Strange, who I think maybe you know,
yes, sir,
began to look at this tape, look at this disc, and began to have questions. Now, remember, the investigation was closed in September of 2011. 14 months later, Billy has been looking at this tape. Billy and Karen live in Florida. Excuse me, I said tape, I mean the disc.
The disc, right.
They live in Florida, and they make a call to CENTCOM. By now, General Mattis, who was CENTCOM, who ordered the investigation, has retired. He's been replaced by 4-star Navy Admiral Billy McRaven, who is now the president of the University of Texas. Admiral McRaven drives out to the Vaughn's home, and Billy has seen something very deep within the transcript. It's a question and answer session.
Mm-hmm.
In that question and answer session, there is a question by one of the investigating officers, and across the table, under oath, are 2 U.S. military officers.
Sure.
One is the commander of the Joint Special Operations Task Force. The other is his subordinate, the J3. That's an acronym that we use, meaning an operations officer.
Don Brown.
The investigating officer asked the question.
Don, stay right there. You know what? I want you to just hold that thought right there. Don't give out that question. We know who was sitting there. We're going to go to a short break here and come back. And when we come back, I want to hear, this is also the first time I'm hearing this. And yes, we've had Mr. Strange on the show. We've had Billy Vaughn on the show. I've heard bits and pieces of this on and off the record, and these anomalies that we're talking about here. You're about to hear what that question was that was found on these discs. You're going to hear it right here on the Pete Santilli Show with Mr. Don Brown on this day, August 6th of 2015. Now, years after this helicopter went down, the cover-up continues. The Pentagon is covering something up, but Don Brown is going to expose it right after this.
A carload of teenagers pulls up alongside you and tosses a milkshake. Splat. What to do? I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll tell you how one woman lost her $1,000 by seeking revenge. Next. In Palo Alto, a woman was out for a walk when a Range Rover full of teenagers roared by. As they passed, one of the teens tossed a milkshake, which, I'm sorry to say, hit its intended target. How did the woman react? Well, not well. She lost her head and hurled her purse at the car, which was a bad idea. For one, it was an expensive alligator skin purse, and 2, it had $2,000 inside. The purse sailed through the car's open window, and the teens drove off, minus one milkshake and $2,000 richer. The moral of the story? When milkshakes fly your way, it's always best to keep your cool. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
The Pete Santilli Show has been growing strong since 2011. That's almost 4 years of bringing you the kind of information you will never find FM radio. Pete Santilli and his crew have brought stories like Cliven Bundy to the national spotlight, the border crisis in McAllen, Texas, and has bravely confronted corrupt legislators who would imprison pastors like Reverend Edward Creepy and Ken Hovind. Recently, the Pete Santilli Show traveled to Baltimore, where he stood side by side with the people against the tyrannical police state, just like he did at Bundy Ranch. For 4 years, the show has been a voice for the oppressed and targeted in this country, and now we have our sights set on getting long overdue justice for the survivors of the USS Liberty. Donations to the Pete Santilli Show not only guarantee we remain on the air without being censored, but it also gives us the power to go when and where we are called. There is so much left to do. Go to thepetesantillishow.com/donate because giving feels great.
Many people have experienced the benefits of drinking all-natural Life Change tea. The unique blend of 8 herbs helps detoxify your body so you can live a healthier life. Numerous testimonies have been given about the benefits of drinking Life Change tea. So are you drinking Life Change tea? Interested? Log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Many are so impressed with our product, they order a year's supply. And why not? When they do, they receive 2 months free. That's a $70 savings. The body is meant to heal itself. Sometimes the body just needs a little help. Get the tea at getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Or call us at 928-308-0408. That's 928-308-0408. This is not an ordinary green tea and is not available in stores. This tea helps with digestive problems, acid reflux, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and as talk show host Jerry Doyle says, it'll make you as regular as a baby bird. Enjoy your life. Get Life Change tea at getthetea.com.
Okay, our most loyal listeners and those people that will hear this segment outside of the presidential debate that's going on, this theatrical performance of those characters that are running for office, all of whom, I might add, and I'm going to point this to Donald Trump, who proclaims to be somebody who wants to be commander-in-chief and cares about our troops and our veterans, but he will not, during any of these debates that are being broadcast live right now, mention anything, especially on this anniversary of the shooting down of Extortion 17. They won't talk about that in the debate. Don, you willing to bet me on this one?
Pete, let me take you one farther. I had communication with one of the candidates who was just yesterday. I don't know if I'll give his name or not, but
sir, can you do me a favor? Okay, this
Sure.
is the Pete Santilli Show. Okay.
Yeah, right.
I would like you to release that information. We are the most transparent, forward. Would you be willing to do that on the Pete Santilli Show?
It was a former U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. Put it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
We had some conversation yesterday via text, and I asked him, please mention Extortion 17. He asked me to email him the bullet points that I emailed to your show, and I did. And as far as I know, nothing was mentioned tonight. So I was very disappointed about that.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But
and so it's very, very difficult. It's very disappointing. Any of these guys could have said, let me just recognize, even if you don't challenge, anything that went wrong, just recognize them for giving their lives on the anniversary of their death. Even if you want to buy the military's, whitewash theory, recognize them and act like a commander-in-chief, for heaven's sakes.
Yes, and you know what? You could even use it for political purposes. If I were running for office, I'd say, you know what? Barack Obama was the commander-in-chief at the time, and the rules of engagement would not be the same if I were commander-in-chief. The rules of engagement for a C-130 requesting pre-suppressive fire, identifying Taliban, that was on his watch, on a Barack Obama's watch. Right, sir?
Exactly.
Yes.
And by the way, that testimony is on that little flash drive.
Yes, sir.
Sworn testimony from the commander of that C-130, and I've read it. And there was a question about tech, and I'll come back, and we want to come back to Billy's conversation.
Please.
There was a question to the commander of that aircraft by the investigating officers about tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTT.
Yes.
TTP, excuse me. And the skipper of that aircraft said, look, I'm going to put this on the record. And I want to interject this. He said, he wouldn't even ask this, Pete. He put it on the record. We requested permission to fire at these, they call them squirters, that's the acronym, meaning Taliban, at these squirters, and were denied. So the skipper of the aircraft put it under oath on the record, and then his navigator, who also testified on the record, said we were told we could not, engage. We were told simply to watch the squirters, a.k.a. Taliban, on the ground. That's on the record. Now, we've got more information off the record from this aircraft, but it's absolutely criminal. These rules of engagement are suicidal. The military is operating under rules of engagement, that is, how it can defend itself, that requires it to have its hands tied behind its back. And we've seen it in 4 prominent cases. We've seen it here in Extortion 17. You saw it at Benghazi with stand-down orders, and then you've seen it in the 2 domestic terrorist actions in the United States, at Fort Hood and at Chattanooga, where officers cannot be armed, enlisted people cannot be armed here when we are targets. The rules of engagement are absolutely suicidal, and someone needs to be taken to task for it. Can you imagine how foolish it would be if General Eisenhower at Normandy had said, "Well, we're not going to bomb the beaches. We're going to have the Navy bomb the beaches at Normandy because somebody innocent might get killed before we send guys into the teeth of German machine gun fire." It is a basic tenet of American rules of engagement. You soften the beachhead before you put troops on the ground. And every tenet of American military doctrine was violated. And these guys, this chopper cannot defend itself, Pete. It was a sitting duck.
Sir, if I can emphasize this.
Everything else is absolutely criminal.
If I can emphasize this one point, and hopefully everyone is catching on here. In the military, I was an aerial gunner. I was in the air wing. Could you imagine sending a CH-46 loaded with some of our most highly trained troops into a hot landing zone without pre-suppressive fire? That's sending them to their deaths, essentially.
And the other thing to remember here is this is 96 days after bin Laden. And if you go through the book, you'll see this, and maybe we'll get into it in a second. But there have been 3 attacks against U.S. military aircraft choppers in this very relatively small Tangi Valley in the 90 days before Extortion 17 was taken down. In fact, there were 2 near misses. One, MH-47, the special ops chopper, was hit. The pilot got the chopper back, and still the rules of engagement were not set to allow for pre-suppression fire.
Wow.
It was absolutely suicidal. And if you forget everything else, that all the other anomalies and irregularities that are attendant to this case, like the unknown Afghans on board, which we'll get to, and other things, then the rules of engagement alone are enough that somebody ought to be court-martialed somewhere up the chain of command for setting these foolish rules of engagement to get these guys killed.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I'm sorry I interrupted our flow here. Carry on with the conversation that Mr. Vaughn had.
So we're now in January of 2013, 14 months or so after the shoot down. Billy Vaughn is in his home in Florida and has begun to look at some of this disc. And he's called CENTCOM, Central Command, and the command. These parents have the attention of the command because obviously the command doesn't want this blowing up from a PR standpoint. So Admiral McCraven himself, who is now CENTCOM, 4-star Navy Admiral, who is a special operator, an Obama appointee, drives out to the Vaughn's home with his senior enlisted man, who is a sergeant major in the Army, probably been in 30 years. And Billy Vaughn has read, in the midst of this 1,200-page report, a question-and-answer session, a very brief question-and-answer session, a question from the investigating officer to 2 officers on the other side of the table under oath. The question is, do we have everyone accounted for, all the bodies? Now, the 2 officers are the commander of the Joint Special Operations Task Force. They don't give us the name. And his J3, that's the operations officer. The operations officer answers the question, and he says, we know who all the Americans are, but we don't know the identity of the Afghans. I can speculate on what happened if you like, but he uses the word but. And as he uses the word but, his boss sitting beside him cuts him off, and his boss says, but the bottom line is we have all numbers accounted for. And they move on. So you have about 3 paragraphs of testimony out of 1,200 pages. Now, Billy Vaughn has read this, and he asked a question of Admiral McCraven. He said, Admiral, he said, I know there were 7 Afghans on board the chopper, who we don't know who they are, but Billy says, I guess that must not have been a big deal because nothing else was said. So Billy, the father, asked this question to the 4-star admiral. The admiral sits and says nothing. after a couple of minutes, when it becomes obvious, the admiral won't answer. It's that senior enlisted guy, that Delta Force sergeant major, who speaks up and says, actually, Mr. Vaughn, that was a very big deal. It should never have happened. So it is the sergeant major who alerts us right under the nose of the four-star admiral, and God bless the sergeant major for doing it, that there's been a major breach of United States military aviation protocol. And Pete, if you've been an air guy, you know how that manifest has to be strictly maintained.
Yes, sir.
And I go into this in the book and even cite the DoD regulations on the integrity of the manifest.
Yes.
But we don't know who these Afghans are. You know, when I was going through the report itself, there was testimony which we're flying these missions with Afghans.
And by the way, please, Don, describe to our listening. I know what a manifest is. Describe to our listening audience what a manifest is.
Sure. A manifest is the best way to describe it in civilianese. It's like a roster. It's like an attendance roster. You're supposed to keep detailed information on the name of every person on an aircraft, and additional information is required for a military manifest. A military manifest, you're also supposed to keep detailed information on weapons brought on board the aircraft.
Right.
And no aircraft is supposed to take off until everyone is sufficiently identified. Well, when this chopper went down, our military began to notify who they thought were dead Afghans, and they found out that the Afghans who were supposed to be on the chopper were still alive. Now, here's the thing, Pete. This major breach of military aviation protocol was totally left out of the final report, okay? Not a word mentioned, as was the rules of engagement issue, whereby this AC-130 requests permission to take out TAP on the ground. Not a word about that at all in the final report, which was released in September of 2011. So it was totally washed up. We don't know who these guys are, and given the history of green on blue violence, that's where we've had Afghans killing Americans. Because of this radical Muslim stuff, we even had a Army two-star general killed last year by an Afghan security detail, shot in the back. The highest-ranking officer killed in what we call green on blue violence. Because of that, these guys could have been anybody, Pete.
Yes, sir.
And
now you're saying, if you don't mind, let me.
The bodies of a couple of these guys, which raises another question. We don't know what happened to the bodies.
Now, Don, you're saying that what Billy Vaughn and those that received that thumb drive, they had data, they had documentation and transcripts of information that never made it to the final report. It was omitted? Is that what you...
Absolutely.
Wow.
You see, the final report was handed out, and there were all kinds of whitewashing going on in that final report. My guess is the authors of those final reports never had a clue that somebody was going to distribute the thumb drives, which would contradict virtually everything in the final report. So when you're hearing these things, you know, if you look at my book, you read my book is written, the biggest bulk of it is a comparison and contrast between the final report issued September of 2011, whitewashing this operation, versus the real evidence on that thumb drive, which contradicts point after point after point after point.
Which is forensic evidence, proof that a cover-up exists. It's not a conspiracy theory.
Goodness gracious! Let me share one other thing with you.
Yes, please.
I got access to 3 autopsies. All right, the autopsies are not part of the military report. Okay, the autopsies were of 3 of our military personnel who died on board 17 were conducted at Dover Air Base. Now, the military pathologist found bullets in the bodies of 2 of the 3, bullets in the bodies. And he made the notation, cook-off rounds found at autopsy, but discarded as having no evidentiary value. All right, let me explain that. You probably know what a cook-off round is.
Cook-off round? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But a cook-off round, for your listeners, is basically a bullet that if you were to take a box of bullets and throw it into a fire, those bullets, say a box of 22 small rounds, they might cook off. They might. But if they do, most people think that if those bullets were to cook off, that they would be dangerous. Mm-hmm. In fact, that isn't the case.
That's right.
Because a bullet is not inherently dangerous if it cooks off, unless it is in the barrel of a gun.
Right.
Where its ballistics can push against the steel and then fly out the end of the barrel of that gun.
Right.
Matter of fact, in the book, I cite 2 studies that are ballistic studies, one done by the United States Army, as a matter of fact, another done by a ballistics expert who was involved in the trial down in Florida, the Trayvon Martin trial, but pointing out that cook-off rounds are not inherently dangerous. So if I were to take a box of bullets and throw it into a fire, and assuming those bullets cooked off, they don't always do that. The fact of the matter is, if you can imagine a bullet, there's the bullet itself, the casing. If it goes off, it's like that commercial back a few years ago from Rice Krispies, Snap, Crackle, Pop.
Right.
Basically, it's innocuous. As a matter of fact, the casing will go farther than the bullet itself because it's much lighter. As a matter of fact, it's almost impossible for a cook-off round to enter the body. And if you do that, it's almost impossible for it to enter the body unless, and here's the unless, Pete. Let's say I'm there in your studio, and you're holding a gun at me, and your assistant there, Deborah, who I've talked to, she's wonderful, by the way, were to take a blowtorch and heat the bottom of that gun and set that bullet off, and you're aiming it right at me, then the cook-off round might enter the body under those circumstances, but only if it's a gun. Right. Here's the problem, Pete. Here's the problem. The evidence that I looked at, the testimony, found the weapon scattered all over the ground, some barely burned. It's almost impossible for a cook-off round to enter the body. Now, is it possible? It's possible if the weapon is aimed at the body. But the thing that's concerning about this, and bear in mind, I only had 3 autopsies made available to me. The thing that's concerning is the military pathologist immediately threw those bullets away and immediately made a claim that they were of no evidentiary value in a forensics case.
Can you?
Why do you do that? I'm
imagine?
asking the question.
Yeah, because obviously there would be rifling striations on any bullet. That's exactly why, sir, if you don't mind me stepping out that far. You would never want to have that evidence anywhere near a cover-up.
If they were really cook-off rounds, you don't throw the bullets away. You preserve the evidence.
Yeah, that's right.
It's interesting. You may remember a few years ago, there was a case here in North Carolina. I'm in North Carolina, 1970, involving a U.S. Green Beret named Jeffrey McDonald. The case was a book written by Joe McGinnis called Fatal Vision. It was about a Green Beret doctor, who was accused of stabbing his wife at Fort Bragg. It happened in 1970, and it was all over the national news. When I was stationed in San Diego in the late 80s, early 90s, the U.S. attorney from Raleigh, who was a friend of mine, was in San Diego, and this is like 19 years after the fact, almost 79, almost 20 years after the fact, and she was at a conference, and she was telling me that there had been another appeal by Captain McDonald, and that all that evidence had been preserved in the United States Courthouse in Raleigh for over 20 years because of appeals. You just don't throw away forensic evidence, and especially in a situation like this. Mm-hmm. It's just a real head-scratcher.
Now, sir, if you don't mind me jumping to the transmissions and other anomalies from the pilot transmissions, sure. That's something that struck me because you identify here something. This first time I heard this, the chopper pilot made very odd transmissions in the last minutes before the shoot down. As a matter of fact, can you stay with me till the top of the hour?
Be very happy to.
Okay. Listen, when we come back, I want to talk about this. The pilot made this odd transmission, including a very odd request for a sparkle, and said he was having trouble finding the landing zone. Now, that particular terminology, some of which I'm familiar with, was his request for possibly a illumination flare. He said he was having difficulty finding that landing zone. Was he looking for a flare? Why was that sparkle request odd? And we're going to hear from Don Brown about that and other anomalies concerning the shoot down of Extortion 17. Danny Jordan, we're halfway through 2015. Back in January, I got you your first TKO Vapor Kit. How do you like it so far?
I love it, and I'm still not smoking, and I haven't had a cigarette since my birthday on January the 27th.
What do you love most about vaping?
You know what, Pete? I love it because it's clean, I feel healthier, and I can smoke anywhere that I want to, and I don't have to go outside.
And vaping tastes great, doesn't it? All the flavors by TKO are absolutely phenomenal. From fruity to just about every flavor that you could possibly imagine.
The flavor is fantastic.
If you go to gmnvape.com, you can order a starter kit. You can get your flavors of some of the best vape fuel that you'll ever find on the planet. Go to gmnvape.com. You can enter a coupon code GMN for a 10% discount. Of course, and it'll ship directly to your door. Go to gmnvape.com.
Susanna, what's the best way to stay warm this winter?
Oh, that's easy. It's Tahiti Joe's hot sauces.
Okay, but what flavor?
Well, that's not so easy because there's so many to choose from.
Polynesian,
Tropic garlic,
Tahiti Aki,
volcano ahi.
camel toe hot sauce,
Analyze this.
Quadruple X Ghost Pepper hot sauce.
Aloha, this is Tahiti Joe, the maker of Tahiti Joe's hot sauces and the Maui Pepper Company. All of our sauces are made with a beautiful array of ingredients with no preservatives added and are prepared with a tropical passion for the perfect balance of flavor and heat delivered directly to you.
So warm up your winter with the tropical taste sensations from www.TahitiJoesHotSauces.com.
Tahiti Joe's hot sauces. Get some
Many
today.
people have experienced the benefits of drinking all-natural Life Change tea. The unique blend of 8 herbs helps detoxify your body so you can live a healthier life. Numerous testimonies have been given about the benefits of drinking Life Change tea. So are you drinking Life Change tea? Interested? Log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Many are so impressed with our product, they order a year's supply. And why not? When they do, they receive 2 months free. That's a $70 savings. The body is meant to heal itself. Sometimes the body just needs a little help. Get the tea at getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Or call us at 928-308-0408. That's 928-308-0408. This is not an ordinary green tea and is not available in stores. This tea helps with digestive problems, acid reflux, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and as talk show host Jerry Doyle says, it'll make you as regular as a baby bird. Enjoy your life. Get Life Change tea at getthetea.com.
Live from the Orbital Bunker in FEMA Region 5, you're listening to The Pete Santilli Show.
Okay, we're in the final segment here of, and I'm going to have to say this, Don Brown. This is one of the most informative interviews regarding Extortion 17. These details and the information contained in your book. To be very frank, I have not read the book, but that didn't stop me from bringing you on to relay this important information, especially on this August 6th. In this final segment, I want you to take this, Don, and I want you to control the next 18 minutes or so, and let's get out as much information as possible, and then we'll provide all the links and everything to your book in today's episode. But continue on, Don, please.
All right. You'd asked me about the anomalies in the air. Now, remember I said earlier this should have been a 10-minute flight. I want you to remember also, and we haven't brought this out, both of these choppers, Extortion 16 and 17, had flown a group of U.S. Army Rangers about 3 hours earlier to another landing zone, which was not infiltrated with Taliban. Now, we had intercepted, as I said earlier, intelligence that over this Tangi Valley, Taliban had been brought in, 100 fighters to shoot down a chopper. But the earlier flights were flown perfectly and on mark. Now, on board Extortion 17, there were 2 pilots. The pilot in command, the PC, was a Warrant Officer 2, Brian Nichols, out of the Kansas City area, and Brian was a young pilot. He wasn't extremely experienced. He had been in the Army and had been an artillery officer before going to flight school. But the guy who was riding with him, who was a co-pilot, was a CW-4, David Carter, who was one of the best Chinook pilots in the Army, best we could tell, and had been an instructor. So first off, while it's possible that the pilots could have missed a landing zone, it doesn't seem likely. One, they flew a perfect mission earlier. 2, the other aircraft in the sky, including the 2 Apaches and the AC-130, could all see the landing zone. Now remember, a 10-minute flight. The flight, by pre-design protocol, was to make call-ins to flight control at the 6-minute mark before landing, at the 3-minute mark before landing, and at the 1-minute mark before landing. And in my book, I go into specific detail on what happened when. But let me simplify for the time being. There was a call made on time at the 6-minute mark. That was about the time before this hook pattern. Remember, we go back to the fish hook. When it started to turn, when this flight is starting to turn, following this pattern of the fish hook, it had been flying along the ridge beside this valley, but not over the valley. Then it turned and came back over the valley. That's when things started to get funny. There was not a 3-minute call. There was not a 1-minute call. The 3-minute call was delayed about 4 minutes. And you'll have to read the book to get the precise time frame on it. But there was an odd request for a sparkle. Okay? Now, you mentioned that earlier. Let me explain to your listeners what a sparkle is. And by pre-designed protocol, when we fly these missions in at nighttime, you got to be able to see because it's dark. So this C-130 above, remember, it's circling overhead and has already requested permission to take out Taliban. It has on it a big beam, and it fires an infrared light beam, like a flashlight beam, down into the landing zone. That flashlight beam can only be seen if you have night vision goggles. That is called a burn, okay? And so the mission called for a burn for 1 minute prior to landing. Now, a sparkle as opposed to a burn is continuous. A sparkle is like a flash bulb going off, pop, like that, right? So out in the middle of this thing, we hear a transmission from the pilot. We don't know who it was. We don't know if it was Carter, the more experienced pilot, or Nichols, the pilot in command, requesting a sparkle, saying, can you guys give a sparkle? We can't seem to find the landing zone. Now, sparkle isn't part of what they're supposed to do. But when he asked for the sparkle, remember I said earlier, there are 2 Apaches flying with them. The pilot of the Apache, and we can read the air traffic control transcript, says, are you a minute out? And he said, no, I'm not a minute out. He said, and then the pilot of the Apache saying to the pilot of Explorer 17, you're not a minute out and you're requesting a damn sparkle. So it's very clear, and I apologize for using it. Like I'm just quoting what's in the air traffic control transcript. So the Apache pilot's confused. Why are you requesting a sparkle? And we don't know why that happened. You know, he said he was not 1 minute out. And, was the sparkle because Brian Nichols was trying to send a signal? It was totally outside of what was prescribed. Never was prescribed. We don't know why the sparkle was requested this day. It's possible, I suppose, he was trying to get a flash to find a landing zone, but you can't really find a landing zone with a sparkle anyway. So it's really, really odd. And so just to give you an idea of the time frame, the chopper did not make a call in at the 3-minute mark, did not make a call at 1 minute mark. 4 minutes after it's supposed to be on the ground, it makes the call in requesting this sparkle. A couple of minutes later, it says 1 minute. 1 minute. Last words we hear from the chopper, the words 1 minute, 1 minute. It still hangs in the air for another minute, and at 2:39 a.m., local time, remember, it's supposed to be on the ground at 2:32. At 2:39, it's still hanging in the air, almost in a hover position. As a matter of fact, air traffic control thought that the SEALs were repelling out the back of this chopper. It was going so slow. But at 2:39 a.m., 40 seconds, and 40 seconds, 20 seconds before 2:40 a.m., there are three shots from RPGs, and one of the RPGs strikes the Chinook in the back rotor and brings it down. It's still hanging in the air, minutes after it should have been on the ground, inexplicably. And so I believe, to be honest with you, something happened on board that chopper. I believe that happened. Now, when the chopper goes down, it gets even, more interesting. First thing that we know from the official
Don, do you mind? I think this is an important point. Can you just speculate for a second? You said that something could have happened on board that chopper. Yeah. Being that we know that unidentified Afghanis were on that chopper as well, right. that something could have happened on board the aircraft at that time.
Something's going to happen on board with the aircraft. We don't know what, but we know this. We know a number of strange things happen. Number one, unidentified Afghanis are on board a chopper. The military covers it up. Number two, that one of the most experienced pilots in the Army can't find a landing zone and is minutes late, hovering in the air dangerously over a hot zone.
Yes, sir.
Number three, we have an odd request for a sparkle, which is not part of the pre-designed flight plan. Mm-hmm. Number four, we have the Apache pilot basically expressing his frustration with Explorer 17 for requesting the sparkle. Mm-hmm. Okay. Number five, and I'm talk to you about the disappearing black box in a minute. Number five, we found bullets in the bodies of 2 of the 3 autopsies, with bullets being thrown away. We also know that we have been told, and this is off the record, not on the record, but off the record, but these Afghans were bad about bringing cell phones on board the choppers and communicating with other people. So we don't know what happened on board, but I believe something happened on board at Chopper. I don't buy the notion that these pilots were so incompetent they could not have found a landing zone. It was dark, certainly, but the weather conditions were clear. The landing zone had been marked, and the other aircraft in the sky were seeing the landing zone. Why was it so late, and why was it still hovering in the air at the time of the shoot down? So it just doesn't make any sense.
Was any of this information part of the omissions in the final report?
No, none of it was. There was nothing about the request for a sparkle, nothing about the delay in landing. I mean, not in the final report. No, I mean we could see the chronology, and we could see testimony from other pilots, and we could see I could actually read the transcript of air traffic control, military air traffic control, going back and forth. But there was not in the final report at all. There wasn't even a problem lining up.
Okay.
Nope.
All right, continue.
And then the issue with the black box. I'm sure you probably know about that. But
yes.
But
talk about that,
please.
please.
That if you have time to do it. But there's just so much.
We do. Let's talk about that. We have about 5-6 minutes left. But please continue with the black box story.
Well, the official report released in September said that the first unit on the ground was U.S. Army Rangers at 4:12 a.m. The same Rangers that both of these choppers had taken to another landing site earlier. Then the report says that U.S. Army Pathfinders arrived at 4:15 a.m. Okay, we know that there were groups on the ground now before both of those groups. We don't know who. We know there were groups on the ground as early as 3:04 a.m. from the report. But when you read the testimony of the Pathfinders were first ordered to go in, a team of 20 U.S. Army Pathfinders, and find the black box. They searched for 2 days trying to find the black box. They could not locate the black box. Now, the families were told in October the black box was washed away by a flood. Okay? Washed away by a flood because the chopper went down in a creek. Now, that story stood. The washed away by a flood story stood until February of 2014 when a political appointee, Gary Reed, testified before this Dog and Pony Show hearing, which lasted an hour and a half, and said the chopper never had a black box to begin with. But, not one congressman said, well, Mr. Reed, if the chopper did not have a black box, why did we send U.S. Army Pathfinders in, 20 Pathfinders for 2 days looking for it? They didn't ask him that. And they didn't ask Mr. Reed, if the chopper did not have a black box, then why did the military tell the family members we believe it washed away in a flood?
Okay.
Why are you changing the story now for the third time? Nobody challenged him. I believe the chopper had a black box. We know from the chronology that we found that there were at least 2 groups on the ground before 4:12 a.m. Remember, the chopper went down at 2:39? There was a group on the ground called Lima Bravo at 3:04 a.m., and another group that was on the ground. We also know the site was secured by a Predator drone within about 15 minutes of going down. So we had secured that landing site by the drone and by boots on the ground from some unknown unit. I suspect the black box was tampered with before the Pathfinders got there. Can't prove it, but I highly suspect that black box was tampered with.
Yes, sir. Now this report that we referred to, the military concludes its investigation with the report that contains important. It's omitting important information. What was the conclusion of the report?
Well, the conclusion of the report was that no one was at fault. That the choice of the CH-47D Army National Guard aircrew was appropriate. Because there were some who complained that we're not using Night Stalkers or Special Operations aviators, and I think that was kind of a red herring. And that it's just one of those things that a lucky shot. The lucky shot from 220 meters away from RPG, and by the way, the RPG-7 doesn't even have a range of 220 meters, took the chopper out. And, so it just was a whitewash.
What is the range of that particular RPG that struck Extortion 17?
RPG-7, right. RPG-7, based on the Combat Assessment Team report, which I read, has a maximum range of approximately 170 meters, but the military report claims, and Mr. Reed testified, that the shot came from approximately 220 meters away, which is outside the effective range of the RPG to begin with, and nobody questioned him on that. Well, see, what they're trying to argue is that a shot was fired outside of the landing zone, therefore suppression fire would have done no good. But we know, based upon basic mathematics, with this chopper being at 100, 150 feet off the deck, which is what the military report says, and based upon the angle of strike, you do a little Pythagorean theorem, you do a little trigonometry, you know that this shot had to be fired from point-blank range. And, by the way, the French and the British press reported that the Taliban had been tipped on the flight plan of the landing zone, had been tipped, and the British and French press got this according to inside sources from the Afghan government. Not one question from the military investigation about whether the Taliban could have been tipped. Not one question from a single member of the Congress in an hour-and-a-half hearing about whether the Taliban could have been tipped. They just ignored it. There's no question the Taliban was tipped in my judgment. No question.
And there were U.S. military intelligence interception of Taliban messages all along, because you said that they've been operating in that particular corridor, but there was a lot of intelligence traffic going through that area. They knew that it was a potential strike zone, right?
Absolutely. Osama bin Laden taken out May 1. Okay, May the 2nd. There is a threat to retaliate from the Taliban. May the 3rd, the vice president reveals SEAL Team 6 as the unit which takes out bin Laden, which ups the ante. Now SEAL Team 6 has a target on its back. It's May 3rd. May the 11th, according to the testimony of the United States Air Force intelligence officer that I've read, May the 11th, U.S. military intelligence intercepts messages from the Taliban that they are moving 100 fighters into this relatively small, tangy valley solely for the purpose of taking out a U.S. Military helicopter. And by this time, those helicopters are going to be occupied by special forces, either U.S. Army Rangers or U.S. Navy SEALs, who at this time were carrying the brunt of the fight against the Taliban, and they were deadly effective at it. Despite all this, we have rules of engagement that still don't allow for pre-suppression fire.
Unbelievable. Don Brown, you know what? I want to thank you so much for your work in this book. This is absolutely unbelievable. Thank you for your continued service to our country. I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, anomalies, that's an understatement. And massive cover-up. We need to share this episode with as many people as possible. Thank you, Don Brown.
Thank you. Have a great one, brother. Thank you.